All right, well, wonderful. It's just about a couple minutes after 2 o'clock here in Denver. So thank you all very much. I think we can just get started. My name is Susan Miller, and I'm the Associate Director of Cooperative Strategies located here in Denver, Colorado. Oh, Doria is here.
Yeah,
awesome.
okay.
Doria, can you put on your video? Okay, we'll keep working it. Just a quick overview of our firm. Cooperative Strategies is a nationwide K-12 consulting firm that helps our schools and school district clients successfully address a wide range of challenges, including enrollment, facility needs, financing, and project management. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. This webinar is the second in Cooperative Strategies Flexibility Forward series. Last week, Cooperative Strategies Executive Director David Sturtz and Mary Filardo from the 21st Century School Fund had a great discussion with our webinar attendees around the capital resources and uses of the CARES Act and potential funding in the future. This week, we've got a great panel that will provide diverse perspectives on the challenges for the shock of COVID-19 that has imposed itself on our schools, districts, teachers, and students. We want to take a look back where we have come from since we went into the remote learning mode and what reopening may look like in the future. A quick aside, I sat on a webinar series this morning with McKinsey, and many of the perspectives that were raised about returning to the classroom candidly were from the healthcare management and administrative implementation perspective. The voices that were missing were from our teachers and students and parents. So today, I think all of those voices are represented on this panel, and I'm excited to have this conversation. So a quick introduction to our panelists. We have Peter Hilts, who is the Innovative Chief Education Officer for District 49 here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It is the fastest growing district in the Colorado Springs area with over 25,000 students in grades pre-K through 14. I think that's the right number, Peter. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. And it basically incorporates about 133 square miles of both rural and urban territory in its boundaries. Stacey Ortega, she joins us from the Orange Unified School District in California, which has a diverse school population located in the Southern California part of the state with about 30,000 students, I believe, Stacey, if that's correct. She is an awesome first grade teacher with over 20 years of experience. She has a classroom, I believe it's close to 30, or are you at 30 students now?
This year it's 30.
Okay, 30 students. And she is also a mom of twins in kindergarten and a third grader. We also have students on our panel from Cabell School District in the southwestern portion of West Virginia. That school district has approximately 12,000 students. William is joining us. He's a graduating senior from Cabell Midland High School. He's an AP honors student and is planning to attend West Virginia University in Morgantown this fall. And he plans to be studying in the math and science areas. We then have Doria. She is a rising junior at Huntington High School. She is also an honor student and plans to carry a full load next year of AP courses, including the AP Biology and AP Chemistry courses. Both students are active in their communities with touch points across their respective high schools. So many thanks to the four of you for joining us this afternoon. So I'm hoping that we can just move on quickly. I should have had your names, et cetera, up. To basically the agenda, we were looking at two parts. One is what we talked about was looking backwards. What have we learned over the past 6 weeks with the remote learning? And then looking forward to what we could potentially be looking at opening up our schools in the autumn, the pros and the cons, and how that looks from all of your different perspectives. So Peter, can we kind of, I was hoping we could start with you actually. Is that okay?
You'd be glad
or are you
to.
saying
Sure.
no?
You bet. Yep, that's fine.
We have the bullet points up on the screen, which is the planning process. I know you're a pretty dynamic district in regards to what your learning models look like anyway. So if you could kind of give us an overview of what that actually looked like going into the March Madness, so to speak, not the basketball season, but just what we were all facing, and how that actually then rolled out to your different, your teachers and your students and your parents, and potentially talk about, how you're monitoring it and how you're keeping a pulse on how things are working through your system.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when I forget parts of that question, you'll coach me back in. But
Absolutely.
The interesting thing that happened for us this year in Colorado Springs is we had a really snowy winter. I've lived here 20 years and I was born and raised in Alaska, and this was a bad winter. And we were right on the cusp of running out of contact days. We have to have a certain number of hours and days in the year. Most of our elementary schools were down to their last day in February. And in Colorado in the mountains, you're not done with snow. In fact, we just had a snow day a week ago. So we started developing e-learning plans as a contingency plan for snow days back in January and February. We already had one of our high schools that has a waiver from the state to use e-days in case of severe in case of severe weather. So we already had some foundation. We also operate a very large K-12 online school, and we authorize an even larger statewide online school. So we had some experience with e-learning. We had a lot of devices in the district. We're not a one-to-one district, but we have a lot of schools and grade levels and classroom settings that are one-to-one. So we own a lot of iPads, a lot of Chromebooks, and some other devices. All of our teachers have MacBooks, MacBook Airs. And so we had some technology foundation, we had some experience foundation, and then in the month of February, we had all of our schools develop e-learning contingency plans. We thought we were developing those to accommodate a snow emergency. As it turns out, we were developing those plans for what turned into the COVID-19 emergency. And so those plans specified things like, which learning platform will you use? In District 49, we basically host two primary platforms. We have Schoology, which is widely deployed and implemented, and then we use Google Classrooms. But we also have a lot of other programs that serve kind of niche or boutique programs like Canvas by Blackboard that works in some settings. Some of our concurrent enrollment students use a community college program called Desire to Learn. So we had some learning management systems in place. We had the ability to do video conferencing already in place, either through Google Hangouts or through the video conferencing platform in Schoology. And so as we made the conversion into e-learning over our spring break, what essentially happened is teachers took all of those generic plans and they started to make them very specific. Our district has an unusual calendar. We open our doors on August 1, and then we take a 2-week break in the fall semester and another 2-week break at spring. And so the initial days of the COVID emergency coincided with our planned 2-week spring break, but our teachers didn't take a break. They spent those 2 weeks getting their e-learning general plans to be very specific. So when we opened our virtual doors again on March, approximately March 27th, when we opened our doors virtually, we were kind of ready to go on the teacher side. And then we had a big task to take care of getting devices distributed into our community. So far, we've distributed about 3,500 tablets and especially Chromebooks out to our students and families, along with a couple hundred hotspots to give people connectivity. So it all kind of came together during what would have been our spring break as teachers got the learning side ready and our facilities and tech crew got the technology side ready. And then the rest of us figured out protocols for things like e-meetings and e-work and figured out whether or not we could use Zoom safely and responsibly, which we could and did because it gave us a third platform so that we weren't overloading the two platforms we already have. So that's the broad overview of how we prepared and got into the transition to e-learning. I know you had some other more specific questions, and I'm glad to answer those.
Well, I guess one of the questions I would have was, were there any surprises along the way that you were not expecting when you rolled this out with your team, and how you're keeping a pulse or a touch on those children that are vulnerable or possibly not necessarily constantly checking in with their teachers, how you're managing that right now?
So here's the number one thing that surprised us. It surprised us how tiring this is. And I've since read some psychological and even physiological studies on why video conferencing is more draining than in-person meetings, but it surprised us. We thought we could sustain kind of a normal workday and a normal learning schedule, and we can't. There's something about this technological interface, the need to be attentive, the need to watch more carefully for nonverbal cues, the fact that you're constantly available to others to look deeply at, all of that is fatiguing. And so that was a surprise to us, that we had to accommodate the fatigue factor that was more than we were expecting. Another surprise to us was how many of our students engaged quickly and stayed engaged. So we're tracking over 85% attendance on any given day.
Okay.
We normally track about 87% attendance in standard operations. So our attendance pattern hasn't shifted a whole lot from where it was under conventional operations. We were really surprised at how many families had reliable internet access. We didn't think the number would be as high as it was. We actually over-ordered hotspots, and we had to send some of them back because we got more than we needed. So we just misprojected on that. We were not surprised, but we recognized a significant need for grab-and-go school lunches. So we opened up, along with our whole region, the whole Pikes Peak region around Colorado Springs, opened up about 40 different sites, and we're all taking care of each other's students. Colorado is a choice state, so any student can go to any school that has capacity. In our district, about 30% of our students come from other districts. And so we wanted to make sure that our students were being fed no matter where they lived, so that they could practice safe spacing and distancing. So those were some of the things that I think we didn't know to anticipate. It was a pretty abrupt departure for us. And so we had to figure out strategies for things like, how do you get students their instruments, their calculators? How do you get students the devices that they need? That was a whole systemic architecture that we had to build. How do you take all the Chromebooks out of the cart, disinfect them, inventory them, and then provide a contactless way to get those in the hands of students? So we ended up doing Chromebook drive-throughs at multiple sites in the district. So those were all things we didn't anticipate we would have to create, but good people, smart people figured them out ad hoc and then incrementally improved the systems. And we feel like our e-learning program is running really smoothly right now. And our students keep engaging, our teachers keep delivering, our parents are doing incredibly sacrificially consistent contact with their children and with the teachers. So we're really proud of what's happened in our community at large.
Awesome. So Stacey, can you give a perspective on what your 6-week start and where you are now with your kiddos? You have 30 kids in your class. It's a first grade classroom, very different dynamic probably than what we're going to hear from Doria and Will in terms of their experience.
Absolutely. So working with elementary students is always a learning experience. I'll just start with that one. And it was no different. Friday the 13th was a crazy day anyway. And when we found out we were not coming back to school the following week, it was a mad rush. It was how many books can you actually send home with a first grader in their backpack whose families already kept them home from school because they were concerned and weren't there? How would you get those kids the materials they needed? And again, all the same things that Peter was going through, just with littles and not a little 2-week prep involved there. It was basically everyone was thrown in, and our staff did an amazing job of just working hard all weekend to try to find a way to reconnect with the students by the following week. Because we did not have sort of this e-learning background going on our campus or even in our district so much, we all ended up searching out individually platforms that would work. We have Google Classroom and now the Google Meets. A lot of us went to Zoom because we had friends in private industry that used it for their meetings, and we went, oh, okay, it's free. Let's grab that and go with that. And then things started changing. After about a week into meeting online with our kids in Zoom and trying to email parents to make sure they had what they needed, we also did drive-through Chromebook drop-offs. We had, meet at school and we'll bundle up stuff that your kids need and do like a handoff through the office with lots of social distancing. Then the district started finding better ways to go about, safer ways to go about all of the community needs. One of the first ones was telling us that maybe we weren't ready to use Zoom with some of the security options and, issues they were having. We had a couple of Zoom bombs happen in our district, so that scared everybody over to telling us to use different platforms like the Google Meets, and there's another Blackboard Collaborate one that we're able to use as well, and a Microsoft Teams. So we're currently now 6 weeks in, all trying to transition to another way to meet with our students online. In terms of the planning that's been involved, it's been teacher by teacher, figuring out how we're taking our grade level curriculum and turning it into something that kids can access online, not just in a book far away from us, sort of thing. What that's looked like for a lot of us is using there's my schedule, lovely. You'll see a lot of stuff on there that refers to the Oranges page or McGraw-Hill, our Orange Unified School District website. We call it the Oranges page in first grade because it's got oranges on it and an orange background. That's the main login that the kids would use in the computer lab to access different technology. So the kids were all comfortable logging into that already, which made it a really smooth transition for the parents, especially I know in my class, because we've gone over this a million times, but even through our whole school, they knew a place that they could go. They knew their ID numbers and their passwords to log in, so they were ready. And it was kind of funny to see them teaching their parents how to do it, which, made us all feel proud. And then it was kind of up to each teacher, once they knew their class could access these resources, then going about, creating a curriculum that would last for the rest of the school year. So as you can see in my schedule, most of the teachers have tried to mimic their day, but on a shorter time frame, because like Peter said, this is exhausting and it's tiring for the kids too. And for a 6 or 7 year old to focus for more than 15 minutes in this environment is amazing. And they've been doing a great job. About 20 to 30 minutes is the extent of my online teaching during a period. But you can see they try to follow a pattern with language arts in the morning and then trying to do some stuff on their computers where they're sending in work via an app called Seesaw, which works as well for us. You can manipulate, add text, images, all these different things in a nice little kid-friendly environment. But then a lot of stuff, as you go through that, was also just trying to get them to pace themselves and try to get them to realize, you know what, you're at home, so things are going to be a little different, and that's okay. So you don't see the bottom half of this schedule, I don't think, and that's all right. I'll just explain that on the very bottom, you see, go get a chore done, go outside. We all tried to put those into the schedules and to let the families know that, hey, we know this is hard. We know it's different. It's okay to take a break throughout the day. We're not expecting our students to just be stuck on a computer all day, doing work all day long, especially at the elementary level.
And so with your teaching,
Yes.
with your teaching and working with your peers, you also have the challenge of children at home, right? And so you have.
Yeah, so we should all give a shout out to my husband right now, who is keeping them nice and quiet with their Chromebooks
Right.
that they got from their school district, which is different from mine.
Right.
The balance has been interesting. As a parent, coming and seeing this from the parent side, my own kids' teachers have gone about this completely different than I have. They have done more of here's a list of things to do each day and good luck sort of motif, whereas I've tried to meet with my class throughout the day to kind of check in with them and, do some of our traditional, mini lessons together and to give them a chance to talk to each other. And I've seen the difference with my kids in terms of just their interaction with their work. They see it as just a bullet point list of things to get done and then, woo, school's over, sort of feeling. And that's tough because I'm like, sorry, mommy has to go teach again. But it is what it is, and it's all good. You have
Okay, thank you. And I was hoping then we could kind of follow up now with Will and Doria. Will is a rising, well, you're rising freshman, really. Will, you're going to be going off to university ideally in the autumn, and Doria is a rising junior. So, Will, in your world that you're working in now, you went remote, I believe, a few weeks ago, and you found out, I think it was 2 days ago, that you guys are not going back to school. And so from your perspective, what is that looking like for you as ending your senior year and then preparing to go off to university in the autumn?
Well, it's a lot of thinking about what is going to happen over the summer as far as the virus goes, and how is that going to change what the ideal plan is. And we're always thinking like, am I going to go to university? Am I not? I hope I am, but maybe I'm not. And you're just going back and forth with the whole thing. And I think a lot of people are just really concerned about like, how is this going to impact the ideal, which is just being a regular kid, doing what regular kids do. You don't have the opportunity to do that anymore. So it's a lot of thinking about that and thinking about how do I get through this year so that I can be out and be on my own.
And Doria, I know that you're still, when Will and you and I were talking, Will is kind of saying, hey, I'm done. I'm looking at the next few weeks and I'm finished. Doria, you were talking about that you had still a number of classes that you had to get prepared for finals, and that you were also trying to get prepared for going into your AP courses next year. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your experience is coming from, your intensive work that you had day-to-day contact with your teachers, and now you're going to be doing your honor work and trying to prep for your AP courses next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really hard to like transition because at first we didn't know how long this was going to last. So a lot of the assignments were just like homework that we had been preparing for. And then once we realized like this is long term, it definitely got a lot more exhausting. Like you said, it's kind of hard to find motivation sometimes, but I think my teachers are doing a really good job at like keeping us active and such.
So I was hoping that if there's, we have a number of people on the conversation this afternoon. Some of you are leaders of your own schools, some of you lead different districts, and some of you are teachers. And I didn't know if there was an opportunity right now, we can ask questions of what it looks like over the past number of weeks and conversation, or we can continue on and we can save it till the end. If there are any questions that might be coming up, I haven't seen any. So if everybody's good to keep going, and if you do have questions, please just type it along in the chat box and we can keep track of it and then be able to provide the questions over to our panelists as we move forward. So that's one of the big questions, frankly. I think that we're all kind of anxious about thinking what that looks like moving forward into the autumn, and how that is all of us are going to be navigating it. So kind of staying with the same conversation, Doria and William, lessons learned now that you've gone through this 6 weeks, and let's say hypothetically, you may need to stay in this mode for a little while with the remote learning. What are some of the key takeaways that you have in terms of staying in a structure or staying focused? And William, your answer may be a tad different certainly than Doria's.
Ladies first.
Wait, could you repeat the last?
Sure. What are the lessons that you are taking away from what you've gone through these past 6 weeks, and how you could carry them forward into next year if we have to stay in the same mode?
Yeah, I think the biggest part about all of this is like having a routine, and that's been really important for me. And so my teachers have like scheduled like Zoom classes or discussions, and it's really helped like to keep me on track. And they have like suggested due dates for a lot of assignments, which is helpful because some days it's like hard to find the motivation, and then other days it's nice to like have some pacing and stuff. So like a routine and like a kind of suggestive schedule from teachers is nice.
And Will, how are you going to deal with not necessarily staying focused right now and then carrying that on into what happens if you don't go to Morgantown right away and you do have to do some online work?
Well, I think incentive is certainly an important part of things, whether that's an incentive in yourself or an external incentive, because you have to do, it's like she said, you have to do something that keeps you motivated. I remember Miss Ortega said that kindergartners have like a 15 or 20-minute attention span. When you become a senior, it drops down to about 5 minutes. So it actually gets lower as you go on. Staying focused, it's kind of a hard thing to do, but you have to stay on that schedule. You have to keep going and continuing your work and trying to keep up with the due dates, even though it's kind of hard to do that, especially because in your mind, in the mind of a procrastinator, it's like, oh, this is just suggested. So, you really have to stress that it's suggested, but it's really kind of not, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And making sure that technology is expanded and making sure that you always have the access to technology you need and that other people need, so that everyone can continue on in the process and not get lost.
And so keeping that in mind, let's say hypothetically, we have to make a decision going forward and whether or not we go back. What are some of the key critical parts in your minds as students that you would have to have in place in order to walk back into your high school, Doria, or will go back or attend your university in Morgantown?
I'll be honest, I don't think, as far as the virus goes, it's like a scary thing, but I think most young people aren't quite as scared as like older people are. Like college, high school aged kids, most of them are content with going back and resuming normal life as long as the authorities say it's okay or the medical experts say it's okay. So I don't think, as long as it's ruled to be okay, that many people are going to have an issue with it. I think you might have some parents that do have an issue. You might have some students. I think the vast majority are going to be okay. But I think if you're in an environment where you have to send people back, because it's preferable to be sent back, you definitely have to have precautions in place that still allow students to resume being students. Because I think essentially, if you have to send students back with like protocols in place to keep separated, or not just within reason, but like you can't talk to anyone in the halls because you're afraid of getting the virus. If it's that bad, then it's not worth going back. No matter how difficult the online learning may be for, I think, most students, it's still one of school's greatest strengths is the social interaction that you have. And I think if you kind of limit that, it sort of defeats the purpose of going back to school.
And Doria, your perspective, would you think about staggered classes, different block days? Would you think about, some kids going back 3 days, some kids going back 2 days, and vice versa? I understand what William is saying about the social components, but there's also the safe distancing, I think, that everybody is trying to be aware of. So, norms may be different for you all. And so where would you be comfortable? Longer classes on given days, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be definitely beneficial to transition back, because I don't think we'll be able to just go back to how it was with like as crowded as school was. But I've talked with a lot of my friends, and they like the virus isn't the biggest concern for them right now. It's like their mental health, not being able to have like face-to-face learning, discussion with their teachers. So I definitely think that if that would like help transition going back to school, like a block schedule or 3 times a week would definitely be helpful.
And Stacey, of course, your perspective with 30 kids coming into your classroom, it would be a little bit different than perhaps what a science teacher, biology teacher might be able to do in the high school with staggering, schedules and things like that. What are your concerns about going back, and what would some of the uncertainties that you'd like to have certain to go walking back into your classroom or into your school?
Absolutely. Well, you guys can see behind me, that's what my classroom looks like. It is a cooperative learning space, and keeping little kids away from each other and not touching everything is nearly impossible. So in order for me personally to feel comfortable going back into the classroom, I would need to know pretty much how is a human going to deal with this? Let's see. Do we have immunity? Have we been, I hate to say, have we been tested, because it just is not even on the plate right now, but, have people already been exposed to it? Are we going to have to, check in with the families, see, have they had any exposure before they send their kid back to school? Personally, I have my 3rd grade son is asthmatic, and he ends up in the hospital with regular bronchitis. Like, I can't be the carrier back to my own family in that situation. So how are we going to sanitize everything? How are we going to, be okay in that community situation? And you know what? Our best learning happens together. So I cannot foresee maintaining this for another 6 months to a year, but it would definitely change how our practice looks. I think all of us teachers would have to come up with a much stronger plan on how we're going to interact with the students. And I think it would have to break it down into you're just meeting with small groups of students in some sort of block schedule online, so that you can form the relationships that you need to help them learn their best. And when you're seeing 30 kids on Zoom or 30 kids on Google Meets, that's just so you can see each other's faces. Like, it's really not going to be very powerful, I don't think, for academic achievement. So
Has your district started to talk at all about how you might be utilizing your facilities differently?
Not yet.
And is there any conversation among you as teachers about what you would like the district to be considering in terms of staggering, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or any type of interaction in that way of giving suggestions and ideas of how you might be managing those classrooms and your facilities?
So far, one of the only things that's really come up is just reducing class size, but that's been, part of our dreams for years and years anyway, that, the smaller class size, the more contained environment, that's pretty much the only thing we've discussed. I don't think we are mentally ready as a staff, for sure, to even approach not going back in the fall as an option. I don't think it's even, been something we want to think about, because it's just so big.
Right. So Peter, from your perspective, I know you have navigated these waters before when you've had your growing district and some kids, the capacity issues and utilization of your different buildings and flex times and how you use your buildings and how the teachers navigate that, as well as students. So what are your insights? What are you thinking about what it looks like going forward? And then what are key decision time periods? Like when do you have to make decisions, or do you even know that yet?
So I'm a visual person. Here's the short answer. But that's not going to work, is it? Because we've got to start planning now. And so I trust smart people. People are really smart. People are very practical, and they're resilient. And within the memory of some of our elders in our communities are social distancing practices that happened in the age of polio, even further back in earlier influenza epidemics. And so we have solved this problem before. We've solved the problem of our need to be social with our need to be safe. We're going to solve it again. And so it's going to include all of the above. It's probably going to include some kinds of split schedules where some segment of a school comes in earlier in the day and some segment stays later. It's probably going to involve some staggering of schedules. We might have students that come on Monday, Wednesday, and others on Tuesday, Thursday, but nobody on Friday or nobody on Monday. We already know in our district that hybrid models can work for a lot of students. Pure online models don't work even for a majority of students. But hybrid models where you have some interaction and then some online interaction, those models actually are very robust, they're well researched. So I anticipate we're going to have combinations of adjustments to time and place standards. I anticipate we'll have some of our large gatherings will get diffused. So we probably aren't going to put 600 middle school students in a cafeteria at the same time. We might be eating lunch in our classrooms. We might be shortening the school day so that lunch isn't always a part of the school day. And I trust that smart people are going to be able to figure out these things. There are a couple of problems. There are more than a couple of problems, but one of the problems that we're going to face is that in order to do the e-learning well, we need to have broad deployment of devices. But we use those devices in our daily operations. So are we going to ask the students to carry those same devices back and forth? Are we going to try and double our inventory of devices? I don't know anybody that's got another 15,000 Chromebooks lying around that they're just ready to send our way. And so we're going to have to be really resourceful, and the resources about which we're going to be resourceful are time, people, and money. So how are we going to use time and space differently? How are we going to assign teachers and other educators and support staff differently? Are we going to stagger their shifts in ways that we have not before? And then how are we going to use our money? Are we going to invest in more technology? Yes, we're going to invest in more technology. Are we going to invest in additional platforms to support digital learning and digital working? Yeah, we're probably going to do that as well. But I think what we're also going to do is be kind of ruthless about driving loose time out of the schedule. So we're going to have to be, when we're together in person, we're going to have to be highly efficient with that time. That's going to be tiring. I think our need to provide just-in-time mental health support is amplifying. We already knew, this is already a national phenomenon. We already knew that we needed to provide more mental health supports. That's getting even worse as our whole society is going through the stages of grief and the stages of anxiety. Well, grief and anxiety often cause depression, and that can be paralyzing. And so we're going to have to be sensitive and anticipate the mental health impacts, the social health impacts, as well as the personal wellness impacts. So I think our list of tasks is very long. Right. The starter will be, how can we reconfigure people and time so that we can maximize our resourcefulness and still preserve safety? That's the starting place. And then I think other things will branch out off of those initial shifts.
And when we go back, Peter, there's going to be the conversation about how we, like you were just saying, the Chromebooks, how do you disinfect those? Or do you have kids bringing them back and forth? And how do you disinfect the facilities, from kids coming in and leaving, and that control of classrooms and that control of schedules? Is that even is that on your multi-list of things that has to be done as well?
Well, here's the great thing. We have an incredible, in our case, we have 2,000 staff members. So we have 1,000 teachers and another several hundred educators and support roles. And those folks are smart. And they're not going to let an infected Chromebook come into the building without saying, hey, what's our protocol? So they've already started challenging us and probing to see, how are you going to handle this? And I think the exact things that Stacey knows are going to be challenges with younger learners. Boy, our high school teachers know it's going to be really hard to tell football players to socially space out during a game. What are we going to do about that? I anticipate that some of the mitigation things that we're seeing in society, like masking, will probably be prevalent. I anticipate we're probably going to have some kind of symptom checking that could include temperature checking, but that could also include people doing more routine reporting of their personal symptomatic or asymptomatic nature. I think we've got a set of ethical and privacy considerations related to that we haven't really had to tackle before. So I know in our case, we're really looking for practical guidance from our state, not only our governor's office and our state agencies, education agencies, and other agencies, but we really need practical guidance from our health professionals. And right now, what we're getting are more generalities.
Okay.
We're getting cautions, and we're getting guidance, and we're getting advisement. We're actually going to need some pretty sharp specifics that say, here are the 6 things that every school must be doing, and you need to give us assurances that you're doing these things before you can begin reinstating in-person learning. All of us in education are familiar with compliance regulations that are kind of abstract. We do a lot of abstract assurances of compliance. Now we need to sharpen and do specific and practical assurances of compliance because of the safety implications if we don't.
And are you expecting the health officials to also give guidance if we have a resurgence in terms of, hey, we have one student who was in Stacey's classroom and has been tested for COVID. Stacey's classroom goes into, I don't want to say lockdown, but testing mode, like you were saying, Stacey,
Sure.
I've got to test everybody. And then we have to let those families know that there was a case. So are we looking for health officials to be giving us guidance in that space as well in order to be tracking where those?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
here's this great. We already have examples of these kinds of situational or adjustable taxonomy. So in Colorado Springs, we have several military bases. Depending on what's going on in the world, those military bases have different levels of access, and they have a thing called force condition protection, FPCON, and the force protection condition is a degree of how careful they are about letting people onto their bases or onto their posts. And we're going to have something similar in our schools and our classrooms. We might have a situation where a student has a family member who has exposed, and that would catalyze a set of protocols for that student's classroom or for that student in particular. When we first started thinking about COVID, we were using very dramatic and wide conditions, such as if any student at a school were diagnosed with an infection with COVID-19, we had to shut the school down for 72 hours. I'm not sure we can sustain that level of reaction. We're going to have to be much more targeted. We're going to probably have to have leveled responses, and we're going to have to scale up in intensity and then have a deceleration or a scale back down protocol. And we're going to probably have to do that on a classroom by classroom basis. But at the very broadest we'll be able to do that is a school by school basis. We can't shut down a district of 25 schools or 50 schools or even 5 schools if we can responsibly contain the exposure in one population or even a subset of that population. So those are some of the physical and medical safety protocols that we haven't yet developed, but we do have some analogs for these kinds of systems already in society at large.
Okay. And Doria, listening to what Peter is saying in terms of if I know that my high school, for example, has a student that has COVID and these protocols are in place, and you know what those protocols are, and your parents know what those protocols are, do you feel comfortable that you and your community and your peers would be willing to stay in the school, or would you say, I need to step away for a week and we'll see what happens? I mean, how do we balance it with what, the administration is dealing with, because they're dealing with directives from the health department and protocols that way, and they've put in place those protocols. How do you interface with those as a student?
I mean, I think that like the majority of us, like me and my friends and my peers, would trust these protocols and the health department and everyone to like, we want to go back to school. So I definitely think that we would be very like encouraged to go back as long as the protocols are being followed and everything. But I can't like guarantee that everyone's gonna feel the same way. Like
Right.
I'm sure many people would still have concerns, and so I don't know like how attendance would be, but I mean I would be willing to go back.
And Peter and Stacey, would you guys envision potentially some staggering of a hybrid of, say, for example, some kids are on, if you only have 30 spaces and you need 15 kids in a classroom, could you still envision having 15 children in your classroom and 15 kids on the video at the same time? Or are we going to have to separate the shorter classroom for those kiddos that are online versus the longer day that you might be having in your classroom? Can you envision that kind of a hybrid?
I think that would end up being a little bit too challenging, in all honesty. You're not really teaching to a screen or a camera when you're in with a class of first graders or even all the way up through high school, I imagine. I can imagine asking certain teachers to be online to support the class and the learning that's going on, and other teachers being live in the classroom. And that may even come down to who feels comfortable going in, who's already had it, can go in and teach live. We'll have to look at our resources and see who would be stronger in different areas and go from there.
So kind of a master teacher thought process. If I'm
Well, you would find who is the best at doing what. If someone's a great classroom teacher and another person is really strong online, then it seems like the online teacher should be able to accomplish, a wonderful class in a shorter amount of time. And then a different part of that learning could occur in the classroom with a classroom teacher. So yeah, you would be able to stagger, so all the kids would be able to access everything, but the schedule would end up looking a little bit different, I think.
And Peter, from your perspective, if you think about I know some school districts have extra capacity in some of their buildings. And so would you potentially use some of those buildings, or could you envision some of your peers using those buildings to do spread it out a little bit more? You change your boundaries, or you would designate that these kids could be going to that school because it's a classroom, it's a school of 500, but they only have 200 at the time. And we can start to disperse children into different locations to kind of mitigate the safe spacing.
Yeah, I think that there would be all kinds of creative solutions. For example, if my earlier illustration is correct, and if we're not going to use cafeterias as locations for seating, are those places where we could, in a large cafeteria, maybe we could have 10 different intervention stations so that we could do the interventions that we need to do for students with all kinds of special populations, gifted students, language learners, students who need support for literacy or an IEP. Maybe we convert our cafeteria spaces into kind of a food court for interventions. Well, we would not normally even think of doing that because the lunchroom is where we have lunch. But if we're not able to have lunch, we're not going to leave a space like that empty. That's going to be gold, and we're going to use that in such a way. There is a way of scheduling space and movement that we haven't really used for schools, but it happens in certain service sector. Restaurants are pretty good at moving people in and out and into tables and off of tables. There are ways of coordinating movement and placement that we will explore, but we haven't had to in the past, because it was okay to put 1,500 high school students all in the same hallway for 6 minutes. Well, it's not okay anymore. So we may now walk into a circumstance where we have one half of our class meeting on Monday, but we have the silver classes all start at 30 minutes past the hour, and the brass classes all start at 15 minutes past the hour, so that they're never in the hallways at the same time. We might even, be even more granular than that. So I think we will figure out ways to use our space and time differently. And I trust the crowd, the smart people, to think about and propose and help us kind of tabletop our way through those possibilities. We'll go through them in advance for practice,
Right.
hypothetically, before we have to go through them with real people in real time.
So there's a gentleman who, Richard, I don't know if you can come off mute. You said that you're building a contingency plan for around 5 different possible situations. Can you tell us what your different situations you might be looking at?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rich Arkanoff, Superintendent, Center Grove Schools in Greenwood, Indiana. We serve about 9,000-ish students. And so we've been working on a few different contingencies that we believe might happen. For example, we may be forced to alter our start time for school year. Right now, our start time is early. Excuse me, too. I've got an audience of geese as I walk, so I apologize. We have we have to alter our calendar to have a later start time. We're also preparing for our state to tell us that we may only need to do 160 days as opposed to 180, or that we may go to hours. So those are some plans. We're also looking at simultaneous learning going on in regards to offering e-learning at the same time that we're offering in-person learning for those that do not want to come back for their own personal reasons. We don't want to lose students, and it may take some longer to get more comfortable coming back into our school district because of whatever's going on at the time. We're also looking at and really trying to make some decisions around what phase we will be in regards to the federal plan. So if it's limited to 50 people gathering, how are we going to accommodate that 50 people gathering piece? How will that impact for example, all of our extracurriculars, but also too, just feeding our high schools around 2,900 students. And so each cafeteria time has hundreds of students in it. So how to do that. It's also trying to plan for some of our more specific courses that go to smaller class sizes in the high school. We'll range from having a class of 60 for some subjects down to a very small class of 7 or 8, and moving some of those high-end classes offline. We're pretty fortunate in that we've had a program called Global Campus for about 8 years now, where we've been operating the high school simultaneously online, but now it's taking it down, to middle school and elementaries. And so those are just some of our contingencies that we've been working on. And we've kind of broken it into 3 different phases. One is ending the year and how we're going to end the year and take care of everything we need to. What are we going to do over the summer? And then how we're going to start the new year. And the last thing I'll say is we're looking at how are we going to close the achievement gap for next year. One of our thoughts is to have a 4-week intercession, if you will, at the start of the year, where we're starting everything back wherever we need to. So our teachers will meet. We're ending school on the 15th of May, which is about 15 or so days shorter than our contract time. So our teachers will work virtually to assess how far they got. And then we will start building some e-learning plans and some other learning plans for those gaps. So those are the different things we're thinking about.
Just a few. Just a few. And I think that's the big question. Stacey, do you have your hand up, or is that up? Okay.
That's an applause.
Oh, okay. Okay. And that is a big question, I think, for, you know, I know Doria raised an issue when we were chatting on the phone a couple days ago, which was, you know, how do I know if I am going to be prepared to be taking that higher level class next year? How will I be able to evaluate whether or not I'm ready, or how will I play catch up? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Doria, but that was certainly ties to what Richard was saying, is how do we assess where we are and what do we need to focus on in order to either, one, get to a point where we can be successful, or get kids back into learning mode. And I don't know if you want to comment on that or not, but that was kind of what I took away from our chat a couple days ago.
Yeah, just like the classes I'm taking now are mainly prerequisites for the classes that I was planning on taking next year. So I feel like there will be a lot of review needed since I'm not getting the full learning experience, I guess.
Right. Are there any other questions or comments? I know we're running up against 3 o'clock, and I want to be honorable to the panelists' time. You guys were very helpful in the conversation and promoting it. And oh, okay, Michelle, do you want to comment on this? You're in Brooklyn, Ohio. You're ending 2 weeks earlier?
Yes, hi. We are ending 2 weeks earlier for many of the same reasons that Richard just indicated. We're looking at allowing our staff some time to develop plans for where they ended the year with the students and how to begin the next year. Hopefully to provide some professional development on some areas where we feel like we need to, and hopefully have more direction from federal and state in terms of where we are heading, although I'm not going to hold my breath that we're going to have a whole lot of information to help guide us. And we've also discussed starting the school year, much like was stated, that we do 3 or 4 weeks where the kids go back with their current teacher. There's a lot of closure that didn't happen with teachers ending their school year with their kids, and we recognize that that's a mental health piece as well for both kids and for teachers, but also to assess where the gaps lie with some of our kids since they missed, you know, an entire quarter of school in a traditional fashion, and try to provide some instruction in those areas. And then we'll cut our quarters down to perhaps, instead of a 9-week, we may do a 7 or 8 week. I haven't done the math on the calendar yet, but those are some things we're looking at to try to cover both the mental health and the academic concerns.
Have you, either Peter or Michelle, have you guys thought at all about hiring additional nurses, or potentially contracting with different nurses organizations for testing purposes for kiddos, so that maybe you'd have a better sense and understanding of what those risks are for those children, you know, who is asymptomatic, who is testing, you know, who's tested and has already had COVID-19? Any thought about that, or talk with your communities?
The challenge that we have, and I think many on here would agree, is we don't know what our budgets are going to look like.
Right.
You know, we're hearing a potential 20% cut to our budgets, which will be devastating for most schools. And we can barely maintain the staff we have, and then we take a cut like that, we would have to lay people off. So no, we have not had any of those conversations as of yet, and we're still waiting to see what kind of funding comes through CARES,
Right.
the CARES Act. So we're, you know, again, we're kind of up in the air on how to proceed, and you know, again, there's no guidance that tells us yet how we're going to be permitted to allow people to come into the buildings. So I think that question will be addressed once we get some of that guidance.
Right. Okay, well, thank you. I know that we are right at 3 o'clock, and I appreciate everybody participating and commenting, and the questions have been included as well. We'll try to keep that as record and send it on out to everybody so you have it. And ideally, we'd like to keep these conversations going and keep people informed of what everybody else is doing across the country. And Stacey and Peter and Doria and William, thank you very, very much for being awesome panelists today and giving us your perspectives and views. We really appreciated your time. So thank you very much, everybody. And I will see you soon. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.